What happens when you're given a triangle and you're given all the sides but none of the angles? Well, you can't use law of sines. You have to know at least one angle to use the law of sines. So this leads us to the law of cosines. You can use the law of cosines whenever you're given three sides of a triangle. Okay? That way we can solve for these angles. Step one, you're going to go ahead and draw and label the triangle. You're going to label your largest side as little a. The next biggest side, you're going to label little b. And then the smallest side, you're going to label little c. Because of that, we will then be consistent with our angles. The angle opposite the biggest side, we will call big A. Then the middle angle opposite the middle side, we will call big B. And finally, the angle opposite the smallest side, we will call big C. Very simple. Next, you're going to label what you know. Little a is 19, little b is 14, little c is 8. Okay, next we're going to write out our law of cosines formula. The way it works is cosine of big A is equal to b squared plus c squared minus a squared all over 2bc. Okay, so basically when you're plugging this into your calculator, you're just going to be plugging in your three side lengths into this expression. However, in order to get a by itself, you will ultimately have to take the inverse of both sides. Okay, and that will tell you what big A is. So let's go ahead and plug this stuff in for step 4. Will be cosine of A, big A, equals 14 squared plus 8 squared minus 19 squared over 2 times 14 times 8. We now need to get A by itself. So that's how we take the cosine inverse of both sides. That way it will cancel the cosine here on the left, and we'll have cosine inverse of all this stuff. And this is what we get. I will show you how to plug this into your calculator. And that will give us our angle. Okay, so I've got my calculator pulled up. Desmos, make sure it's in degrees. I'm going to type in functions. I'm going to go to cosine inverse. I'm just going to start typing away. So first we have 14 squared plus 8 squared. Then we have minus 19 squared. Make sure we're in the parentheses here. We're going to take all of that and let's see what happens when we hit divide. Okay, so see, that's not the way we want it. We want all of that to be divided. So I'm going to put an extra set of parentheses inside of here if it'll let me. There we go. And then hit divide, and that way all of that's on the top of the fraction. All divided by 2 times 14 times 8. And there you go, 116.801. That will give us our big A. Now that only gives us what? This angle, right? We have to solve for the other two. You can, at this point, how can you solve for the rest of them? Where we're going to use the law of sines. Now, again, we want to actually store this in our calculator when we're plugging in for law of sines. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to say that all of this that I just solved for is going to be equal to big A. So I'm going to say big A equals that. That way when I use it in my law of sines formula, I don't get any rounding errors. Okay, so to use the law of sines, we have big A and little a, so we can use that. We can either solve for B or C, it doesn't matter, just solve for B, I guess. So we'll have little a over sine of A equals little b over sine of B, and we'll go from there. Okay, so it's 19 over sine of big A, that value we stored in our calculator, equals little b over sine of big B. We will then cross multiply, and we will get 14 sine of big A equals 19 sine of big B. Next, we will divide both sides by 19, and we'll take the inverse, sine inverse, to get b by itself. So it'll be sine inverse of 14 sine of big A over 19. I want to double check to make sure that I stored this right in my calculator, so let's go ahead and plug this in. So it's going to be 14. Oh, forgot my sine inverse. Okay. So it's going to be sine inverse, go to functions, sine inverse of 14, sine, make sure that's inside the sine inverse. Now again, I've stored my big A up here, so I'm just going to use that next to plug in. so it doesn't round anything. And that's all going to be divided by 19. And I get 41.124. And there we go. I did actually store it correctly. And that's going to be my big B. Now to solve for a big C, I just have to do 180 minus the two angles that I just solved for. And that will give us the third angle. Step 7, use the 180 rule to determine the third angle. So it's just going to be 180 minus the other two angles I figured out, 22.075. And there's my final answer. I used the law of cosines to solve for all three of these angles, given that I had these three sides. And I used the law of sines as well. So I used the law of cosines and the law of sines together to solve for this triangle. Okay, that's it for this example, using the law of cosines and the law of sines to solve for a triangle when you're given the three sides and you have to figure the three angles. If you have any other questions about this example, let me know.